Have you ever felt like something is just off with the financial system, but you can't quite put your finger on it? Well, a recent analysis from the Meridian uses this single powerful analogy to explain the hidden cracks. It paints this picture of a prosperous town built on a floodplain, and then it asks a pretty chilling question. What happens when an earthquake hits instead of a flood?
The source kicks things off with this thought right here. It really sets the stage for the whole story, you know? It's about these hidden cracks forming in our financial system, a system that, honestly, on the surface, still looks remarkably solid to most people.
So to understand where those cracks are coming from, we first have to understand the foundation itself. We've got to look at what the entire global financial system has been built on for the last, 50 years or so?
And at the very heart of it all is this thing, the government bond. It's really simple. It's basically an IOU from a country. For decades, it was considered the safest investment on the planet. I mean, the thinking was, major governments don't just go bankrupt, right? This was supposed to be the bedrock.
And here's where things get really interesting. See, after the US dollar was taken off the gold standard back in 1971, these bonds, especially US Treasuries, they became the essential raw material for global finance. The entire system, and I mean all of it, was resting on them.
And this created this incredibly powerful feedback loop. Global regulations basically forced big institutions, we're talking banks, pension funds, to buy these bonds. This created a guaranteed, built-in structural demand. And what did that mean? Well, it meant Western governments could borrow and spend almost without any limit because they knew there would always be a buyer.
And boom, this brings us right back to the core analogy from our source. It's perfect, right? The financial system became this huge, thriving town. It was built on what looked like rich, fertile land, which was government debt. But that land was and always had been a really dangerous floodplain.
Okay, so what happens when you live on a floodplain and the river starts to rise? Well, you build dams. And for the last 25 years, that is exactly what the financial system did, over and over and over again.
Just look at the timeline. Every single time a crisis hit, a financial flood, the response was always the same. Central banks would step in and build a dam by printing money and slashing interest rates. From the dot-com bust to the massive 2008 global financial crisis, and then of course the COVID pandemic, each flood was met with an even bigger and bigger dam.
And here is the absolutely crucial point. The dams worked. They did. They stopped the floods, but each one of those solutions just pushed the risk further upstream, which allowed an even bigger, more fragile town to be built downstream. So the fixes weren't free. They were just loading more and more and more weight onto the system.
But what happens when the problem isn't another flood? What if it's something totally different? Something the dams were never, ever designed to handle in the first place?
So the analysis puts forward this idea of a hypothetical conflict in Iran in 2026, and it argues that an event like this would be a totally different kind of crisis. It's not just another predictable flood, a financial panic. No, this is an earthquake, a shock that fractures the very foundation the town is built on.
So why an earthquake? Because the damage is physical, it's real. We're not talking about complex financial instruments here, we're talking about broken energy supply chains, damaged natural gas facilities, and literally destroyed infrastructure. This is a shock to the real economy, not just the financial one.
And this brings us right to this moment. The source calls it the engineer's dilemma. The earthquake has hit, the dams are shaking, and the engineers, the central bankers, are suddenly realizing their old tools might not work anymore.
So what is it? What makes this moment so profoundly different from all those other floods that came before?
Well, in the past, when inflation was low, the answer was always easy. Print money, cut rates, build a dam. The flood stops. Simple. But now, with inflation running hot, using that same exact tool is like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. Printing more money just pours fuel on the inflation fire the system is already struggling with.
And that's the trap, isn't it? The main tool for building dams, the one thing that has saved the system time and time again, is now completely boxed in by the very inflation it helped create over all those years.
And we can see the real-world effects of this dilemma right here in the data. Just look at these UK figures from March 2026. The 10-year gilt yield, that's basically the UK government's borrowing cost, is at its highest level since 2008. Public borrowing, almost double what was forecast. And get this, the annual interest payment on their debt is now larger than their entire defense budget. These aren't just abstract numbers, they are the literal sounds of the foundation cracking under the strain.
So let's bring this all together. Let's step back and look at our dam analogy. What does it look like right now, in this very moment?
The picture it paints is, well, it's pretty stark. The floodplain, that foundation of government debt, it's fractured from the earthquake. The engineer's main tool for building dams is basically unusable, and the water, from both the financial stress and the real-world inflation, is rising.
So given this incredibly precarious situation, what's the final chilling takeaway from this whole analysis? What's the advice?
Just one word: row. It's a stark, powerful final thought that suggests the time for relying on dams and engineers is just over. The only option left is to navigate the rising waters yourself. It really leaves us with a pretty provocative question, doesn't it? Are we all prepared to row?